And welcome everyone and good afternoon. We're really pleased to have you all in this session that's in partnership with the Designer at Heart. We've been working with Martina and her team for a number of months, and we really like her approach and focus on design and well-being and sustainability and customer experience. But when she spoke to us about using the research that we did last year on what Gen Z want from a home, we were thrilled that she wanted to take this and explore what that could mean in terms of internal layout of flats and how we could adapt that PBSA product better suited for students. And whilst we all know that communal areas in PBSA, BTR and co-living are have been developing and growing and getting more luxurious and developing, the actual student room and flat I don't think really has evolved as quickly. So actually we're really excited by what Martina and her team have produced in response to our research, and I think it's a really good start at pushing the boundaries of what a cluster flat could look like in the future. And that said, we also know there's a lot of things to consider when building PBSA in terms of building efficiency, operational efficiency, sustainability, maintenance, building costs, and of course importantly what that's going to impact on the rent model, and how changing layouts is going to impact on mental well-being of residents. So we wanted to take the work that Martina's done and bring a panel of a very insightful guests to kind of discuss that and start that discussion of trying to evolve and move PBSA kind of internal layouts forward. I'm sure having that introduction, many of you are excited to see the work that Martina has done. If it isn't already in your inbox, it will be there very soon. It's a great piece of work and we urge you to kind of go and have a look at it. But let's get on with our discussion today. And we will come to Lowri first. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi everyone, my name's Lowri. I am the Resident Wellbeing Manager at Student Roost. I've been working in the industry for over 15 years now. So yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation.
Tony?
Hi everybody, I'm Tony, Operations Director at Nido Living. I've been around 28 years now. I've watched the industry evolve, especially on the student side. Really keen to have this conversation and also understand people's views and questions on the student design of the bed spaces.
Benjamin?
Hi, I'm Benjamin Hall. I'm the founder and the owner of LOFT. We started in 2003 supplying furniture to student accommodation, HMOs, residential, and really interested in enhancing the living sector, the living experience. And I've got to know Martina over the last year or so, and I think that we're super aligned with regards to just enhancing that resident experience from a design and a product perspective. So keen to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to pass over to Martina in a minute to introduce herself and talk through kind of where she is. Sarah, I'll also be handing over to in a minute. If you don't know Deenie, I'm Deenie, and Sarah, we're the property marketing strategists. And please, if you've got any questions, stick them into the Q&A function and we'll put those to the panelists as we go through. But I'm going to pass over to Martina to talk a bit more about herself and the work that she's done. So Martina.
Thank you, Deenie. Hi, everyone. My name is Martina. I am the founder of A Designer at Heart, which is a global interior design agency specializing in PBSA, co-living, and build-to-rent. I have 9 years of experience as an interior designer, of which 7 focusing mainly in PBSA and build-to-rent. I might share the screen. Deenie, can you allow me to share maybe? Obviously, you will have received the white paper already, and if not, it will be with you soon. Just prepared a 1-pager there. Here, just to give a little hint of what it is. The reason for this research is that working a lot on PBSA, me and my team were analyzing some of the trends, as we generally do. What we see in general, as Deenie said already, is not much innovation in the bedrooms as much as in the communal areas. Bedrooms tend to be small unless it's a premium product. The cluster flats, again, for efficiency reason, they tend to be quite big, and students end up sharing with 6 to 8 people, whereas the amenity spaces are getting amazing. Like, they are big and flexible, they are very well designed. There is really a trend to enhance those, and obviously developers use the amenities to attract students because they enhance the student experience. And I mean, overall, the downside is that maybe they do increase the price in general. And at the same time, we came across the survey that Deenie and Sarah have conducted together with UPP, and we thought that some of the results were quite interesting. So nearly 50% of students prefer to live with 3 to 4 people maximum. As we all know, there is an overall concern about affordability, and also some students expressed a desire to interact more with the local community. So that got us thinking, is it really important to have so many exclusive amenities in PBSA, or are they going to prevent students from interacting more with the local community? And the reality is that if students don't go to PBSA, they will go to the private rented sector, where maybe they will share with maximum 3 to 4 people. So what we tried to do was to explore a model where maybe we can have fewer amenities and redistribute the square meters on the floors and get the students a more flat-like experience with kitchens for 4 people and more semi-private spaces on the floors. There are options with co-working rooms on the floors. There are options with potentially smaller rooms that could work when mixed with these semi-private spaces. There is one option with a shared bathroom, which is a bit controversial, but it was our attempt to make some rooms more affordable. So everything is based on this assumption that maybe we can rethink how we distribute the amenity spaces and get more flat-like experience on the floors, rather than this big separation between amenities on the ground floor and small private spaces on the other floors. None of this is a final solution. Those are ideas that we have put out there to brainstorm together and see if any of this proves interesting and is worth investigating more.
Right, thank you, Martina. That's really, really interesting. And like she said, that is just a small hint of what the white paper looks like. So you'll all be able to read and digest that in more detail. What was your inspiration, Martina, for you and the team to pull this white paper together?
I mean, generally, when we approach a project, we get involved at a kind of a later stage when planning permission is already granted. And that's because obviously we look at the interior part, so that's quite common. But that means that we have a lot of freedom in the amenity spaces because we are provided with a big room that we can divide and utilize as we think best. But in the rooms, there is less flexibility because the building layout is already done, so we cannot change much. So what we do is to look at what is there and think, how can we make the most of it? And I think it makes sense that interior designers, project by project, get on board at that stage. But looking at the survey that you have done and the results, we thought whether it was worth to take a step back and maybe rethink those layouts and the benchmark that everyone is following, and think of different solutions, and whether we can learn more from private accommodation, for example, and give that sort of experience to students.
Thank you. Tony, from your many years of experience in the sector, what do we understand about how students use their bedrooms and their flats? And how has that evolved?
It is interesting because I'm of the age or experience where when I first started in the sector, it was dormitories and we had lots of people sharing bedroom space, but then the community space, as we would call it now, the dining room or whatever it was at the time, was used a lot for places to study. And we've kind of gone full circle on that, where we've gone through building these great spaces where people can study in the rooms and having no social space, because in them days the model was not to have any social space, because if you have a social space, you're not making any money on that square footage. Two, we need to develop communal spaces, study rooms, private dining rooms, gyms and things like that. So I think nowadays what the residents use the rooms for, it's a combination of things, and also depending on the individual resident, but generally they're there to sleep, wash, and have some quiet period time to themselves, but they do like to study in the social spaces within the building, or indeed within the university. Residents will leave the accommodation at early hours in the morning and not return till late at night, and they take advantage of sitting in a library with their laptops and just carrying on studying in groups with their friends, where they can touch base, or they just want to be in a space where other people are studying. Out of all our properties, I would say the majority of the study spaces are well used, from early hours in the morning till late in the evening. So I think the bedroom spaces, as has already been alluded to here, it's something that we haven't changed for many years, but I think that's something that we need to have a look and focus on.
And Benjamin, obviously you span kind of multiple sectors in the rented property sector. How does this kind of differ to the wider co-living and build to rent sectors, the way that other segments of the community, if you like, use their flats and rooms?
Well, I think Martina's got a good point that we need to sort of integrate social spaces throughout the building rather than separating it, having all of the social and amenity space on one floor and then the living spaces upstairs. And people get a bit nervous about going down into these big, vast sort of social spaces that quite often look like really bad executive airport lounges that just have, no soul in them, no private area. And if you're not particularly confident and you don't want to go, if you're having a bit of a bad day, you don't really want to go and sit in one of these big, really, lit spaces. And I think that from what we're seeing now, providing spaces with more flexibility is best received within, it doesn't matter whether that's co-living or build to rent or student accommodation. I think that it's important that as designers and as accommodation providers that we provide the residents with more flexibility and choice as to how they use the space. You still see student accommodation with play and work and rest written on the wall in like illuminous letters, and it's a bit embarrassing because the people that are designing these spaces are like 20 years older than the kids that are using the spaces, and they don't necessarily. I know when I was at university, if somebody told me that that's where I was going to go and study, it definitely wasn't where I was going to go and study. So having these conversations about enhancing the living experience and sort of trying to bring a more residential feel to PBSA, I think is a huge step forward. And I know we've spoken about it, Sarah, for a long time, and Deenie, and I think this is good progress. From a sort of what's the difference between a resi and co-living and student sort of ideology is, I think everybody is trying to create a sense of community and a sense of sort of belonging within a residential space these days. I think the lines are quite blurred between all three sectors, and it comes down to the way that the building's operated and the way that the building's designed. I think that each operator has its own ideas. I think probably Lowri could probably talk about this a little bit, or even Tony, but from what I'm seeing, that the lines are becoming increasingly blurred, and enhancing the residential experience, making it feel more of a home and trying to encourage longer residential tenancies are definitely sort of the future of residential accommodation anyway, from where we are.
And Lowri, how, what you're an expert and a specialist in well-being in the student sector. What kind of impacts does the room or the flat environment have on a student?
I think it all comes down to feeling like the sense of belonging. I think it's really, really important that the resident feels like they are a part of a community, definitely. And I think what we're seeing is that there's, there's major concerns around isolation and individuals feeling isolated in accommodation, which is having a negative effect on their overall experience whilst at university. So recent studies show that loneliness is massive, and it's shocking when you hear that actually 1 in 4 students feel lonely most or all of their time at university. So I definitely feel that there's a lot that we can do to help with that transition, especially when we're looking at the flats as well. Allocation, for example, is key, making sure that individuals are with others that are going through similar journeys to them. And also just making sure that there's an open door policy. So there's upskilling of teams so they know exactly how to help those residents navigate these new experiences that they're going through. And I think as well, there's no one size fits all when it comes to accommodation. We have to be open about the fact that every individual will want something different from an accommodation. So even though we can't match everyone's preferences, we do need to make sure that, I think Benjamin said about hearing that student voice, what do they actually need from the accommodation? And that's really, really important. And when it comes to allocation as well, their preferences, lower floors, higher floors, if they've got personal preferences, making sure that there's an open conversation about what that individual needs and make sure that those needs get met as well when it comes to that flat allocation. So yeah, that's huge really. And I think the flat and making sure that there are certain elements in place when it comes to design, that can help with sleep, having natural light, all of these are givens really. But yeah, when it comes to communal spaces as well, I do think it's imperative to have a variety of different kind of spaces to really help that resident experience as well.
I mean, isn't it, I was going to say ironic, but I don't think it is ironic that we're talking about large-scale PBSA buildings, but the students are saying they're lonely in them. They're surrounded often by hundreds of people, but it's not meeting their needs where it comes to community. And I'm not sure if my next question is counterintuitive to that or not really, but one of the things that we've been discussing with Martina, which came out of our research, is students very, very clearly wanted to live in flats of 4 or 5 people. Their preference for the bigger flats was much, much lower down. So I guess if we take that kind of concept of smaller flats, could that be a way to improve satisfaction and well-being? I'll open it up to all of you to discuss that.
Well, I think the smaller flats have always been the most popular when you come to market to sell. They're the ones that go first. They're the small 1-bedroom, the 2 bedrooms, the 4 bedrooms always sell well. And that's always been the case, and that doesn't surprise me. I think it all depends as well, because you've got to bear in mind we're an international platform now, that depending on where you are, so in Europe, in certain parts of Europe, they don't want cluster flats. They don't want that. They're very difficult to sell. They prefer the studio, and that's where both Benjamin's and Lowri's points come into, where we need to facilitate either on a floor level or on a better level communal spaces that they can use and join in. I think, to me, we're trying to fix a lot of things in one go, and we need to focus on what we can do. And I think the smaller flats have always been popular, and they always sell first. The 10, the 12 bedders, or indeed, I remember years ago working for one university, we had 28 beds in a flat. They went, but that was on university campus, and you had no choice.
I agree, but also it's interesting what you're saying about the studio flats. That reminds me of the project we did in Copenhagen, and we discussed this the other day. Like, it's very interesting. It's all studios, but on the floors there are those communal spaces that are dedicated to some students, so they have access control. but they are is not a cluster that's closed behind a door, so then you have to interact just with the people in the cluster. Those communal rooms, they are on the communal corridor to the rooms. Everybody can pass by, and there is a big internal window, so everybody can see in. So even if it's not your communal space, but you pass by and you see a friend or somebody doing something, you can always like knock, and it kind of facilitates that interaction. Whereas in a cluster, you're kind of limited to the people you're sharing with, right? So that could be one way to look at it. And I wonder if we can open up clusters as well and do that even if people are in a cluster. Like, can we open it up and so it's not behind a closed door to facilitate that?
Lowri, what do you think about smaller flat sizes? Would it help or hinder community and well-being?
So I think something that does come up is that internal dispute. You know, you've got individuals that are navigating through this new experience, living away from home for the first time, living with people that they've never met. So when they are in a cluster with 8 people, for example, it just heightens the amount of additional pressures and kind of working through living with others for the first time. So I think when you are living with that many people, you know, you're going to be very, very lucky if you move into a student accommodation, automatically build an amazing friendship with 7 other people, and you all have the same kind of values and that level of expectation when it comes to keeping the kitchen clean, for example, or being respectful of each other with potential antisocial behaviour. So I do feel that smaller flats may assist with that. And I think where we do have internal disputes and, you know, more people living together, it does come with it its own kind of concerns that could potentially impact on individuals' well-being and their enjoyment in the property. But I think that does come back as well, is making sure that we have open conversations and there's clear policies and processes and guidance, etc., with those accommodation providers as well. So with that in mind, I think smaller clusters would probably help with that aspect, because it's less people kind of going through that experience and working together to create that community within that flat.
I think it's much more aligned with the kind of the HMO or the build to rent market. You know, you do have those smaller groups and people are actively choosing to live in a house or you know, a private apartment with 3 or 4 other people. They're generally not choosing, because it's not, you know, you don't get those massive houses anymore, so they're not choosing that. And I guess this kind of begs the question, really, Tony. You've said they sell really well. We've all said that students want it. You know, why have we not seen smaller flats generally in PBSA? Is it efficiency? Is it build cost? Is it health and safety? Is it HMO rules? You know, why are we even having this conversation if we've all, you know, we could finish the webinar now really and just say, yes, everybody wants smaller flats, job done.
Yeah, I don't think that's the answer. But let me answer your question first. It's to do with making the deal stack up and the number of bed spaces you can get in. And also, especially now with the build costs as well, it all feeds into that. And that's why you have these lovely combinations. But I also think it's to deal with your location. So I remember when we first went into Ireland and we were working together at the time, they would never allow studios in Ireland, period. They just wouldn't allow it. And it's only after we did our first project over there, will remain nameless, that actually we started introducing studios. Firstly, very limited, and then it grew from there. I think that's right. But I think what we need to do is not just think about the size of the flat, but also the design of the bedrooms. I think it's had the same design since really I moved away from dormitories when I first started in the sector. It's always had the same. You walk in, bathroom on the left, kitchen on the right if it's a student, if not, wardrobe, desk, bed. And it's all very much stayed the same. We've all tweaked it with a feature wall or a couple of USB points or whatever, and I've been deliberately simplifying it big to make the point. But if you could look at co-living, which I had a pleasure of going to a conference last week talking about it, they've taken a look at that space and actually used it and how people use it and actually tweaked it differently. Which actually will make tick the boxes of well-being and welfare, but also give the residents a taste of what's coming in the future after they finished at university.
We've had a question from Luis Salazar, which is to do with what we were discussing about studios as well. So we've talked about kind of small cluster flats, but if we take it one step further, and you know, to your point about studios in Europe as well, Tony, and I know Martina that you've looked at this as well. How, if you did have a studio scheme, and there are many of them and they're still being built, what's the best way to incorporate communal spaces that could kind of overcome the challenge of creating community?
No, I mean, it's basically what I was saying before. Like in my opinion, like if you can sort of reduce the community, if you have a building with all studios and it's hundreds of people, I think it's difficult to get them all together. If you reduce the scale a little bit and you have the amenities on the floors, it might encourage more interaction.
Have you seen anything like that live, Benjamin?
Some of the best schemes that I've seen have had sort of amenity spaces integrated on each floor, and then the operator will have a sort of, each night of the week there will be a different social activity on each different floor, so you're like coming into the house of the people that live within that floor. And that's happening in Amsterdam, Berlin, like Copenhagen, lots of the places that we've been and seen really forward-thinking co-living schemes. The amenities have been integrated throughout the building, and then the ground floor allows the public in as well. And obviously there's, you know, that's quite a controversial topic, but you know, the students from your report have all said that they want to feel more part of the local community as well. So the ground floor space is more open for other people to use with some food and beverage stuff, but the upstairs is secure. But that's where the community focused activities happen with larger kitchens. So rather than having a studio with, you know, like a kitchen in it and everything that you need in it, so you don't ever leave your room, forcing people to come outside of the bedroom and study outside of the bedroom, do their laundry outside of the bedroom, and do their cooking outside of the bedroom, and try and, you know, meet people and integrate.
I guess that's what Martina's plan shows, is that what she's suggesting is kind of a communal study space within kind of the cluster flat, which takes the students' kind of onus on being so self-contained in their room and studying on their own, and probably watching TV on their laptops on their own and doing everything on their own. It does kind of enforce this, but in a much smaller scale than these bigger communal spaces, which, as we said at the beginning, can be quite intimidating. And
I think Tony made a good point a minute ago about preparing people for life outside of PBSA. Because if you have a studio and you've not really integrated, then you find yourself in a house share in a HMO where you have to share the bathroom, have to share the kitchen, you have to share the living room area. But you've been used to having a studio where you've got everything in there, then you're not really preparing that individual for, you know, a life in a shared community. You know, HMOs these days, 5-bedroom HMOs. If you don't know the people that you're living with, you know, that could be quite intimidating if you've not really had the full student experience and met your best friends for life, you know, while you've been in a, you know, purpose-built halls of residence or whatever.
One of the Martina's concepts, I guess, is this sort of co-working space, really, which you have looked in quite a lot into what that means for desk space. And I know Lowri and Tony have got quite some strong feelings on that as well. So Martina, do you want to explain a little bit about how I guess this communal workspace concept kind of came about, and what compromises you know, would have to happen in the flat for that to become a reality?
Yes, of course. So the main idea is that, like, there was feedback from the survey stating that some students feel having a big desk in their bedrooms, it's almost bad for their well-being, because they cannot switch off at the end of a study session because everything is in the room, so they still think about study even after they've finished. So the idea was, even though we hear that the study rooms are very well used, there was still like this result, and we were thinking in a communal study room, especially on the ground floor, you would need to unpack your stuff every day at the end of the day. So it might be that in some situations, students prefer to stay in their bedroom. If we have those co-working rooms on the floor and they're dedicated, so students get their dedicated desk, that might encourage them to get out of the bedroom and study there because they don't have to unpack at the end of the day, every day. But obviously this takes space and resources, so it means we need to reduce the amenity spaces on the ground floor and maybe brainstorm what we can remove from there. Could it be the gym, and then the students can use a local gym instead, potentially? That's just one idea. But also maybe the rooms will need to be a bit more efficient. And I know we are saying that maybe it's bad that the rooms are getting smaller, but if there are proper semi-private spaces on the floors, would that be a good trade-off? So if, for example, in the bedroom, instead of a massive desk, there is just a laptop stand or a small desk for private calls or when you absolutely need it, but then you have your co-working room and the other social spaces, like, would that be a good idea, worth investigating?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Lowri, what did you think about the desk situation?
So, from my experience, the most common question that I get asked from potential customers is how big is the desk? And that's not just for study, that's for gaming, it's for art students, it's for individuals to potentially spread out all of their work. So smaller desks to me, yeah, I don't know how fond I am of that idea, but it's just potentially looking at maybe storage. You know, is there any other ways that we could maximize that space in the rooms with clever storage underneath the desk, all of these things that could help, even on top of the wardrobe, things like that could potentially assist. But from experience, yes, we have people that study in their rooms, but actually there's a lot that can be done through that communication and that language in that property to encourage people to come and use social spaces for study. So I definitely think having additional study spaces are great, but limiting it to floors potentially may result in individuals maybe not meeting as many people, because you are limited to the people that live on that floor as well. But going back to the space on the desk, I definitely think that that's something that it's for many, having a big desk is an added bonus really in a property and in a room.
Is that one of the, like, I've been listening to the conversation, I think one of the things that keeps coming back to me is, are we too often trying to make a one size fits all? And what a first year student needs is not necessarily what a second year student needs. What someone who's into gaming needs is not necessarily what someone who's into reading a book needs. So is there not enough segmentation? Is that hindering the evolution, I guess, of how we build these rooms?
I mean, it's interesting because listening to both Benjamin and Lowri again, I find it fascinating. I love the idea of hot desking in study spaces, which is kind of what Martina was suggesting, depending on where the study spaces are around the building. I mean, the practical thing is, can you afford to put a six-bedded study space on every floor, and what will the impact on the both? That's another discussion at the time. As for the size of desk, I'm kind of not polar opposite to Lowri, but I think that the opposite applies. But I think rather than saying it's black and white, I think what we need to do, and again, I've got rose-tinted glasses from the conference last week, is we need to look at this space and how the space is to be used. And regardless of the year of study, it's also down to the individual. Some people don't study alone. Until COVID, I couldn't work from home. It was a real problem for me because I wasn't disciplined enough. And it's only because I had that short enforced working from home period that I actually learned to cope with it. Individuals that live with us are the same mind. Some people prefer to study alone, others prefer to study in groups or around other people, or to have spaces where they can go, do their studies and go for a coffee or whatever. So I think to me, rather than the size of desks trying to define that, we need to define how that space is used. And are they just using it for study? Are they using it for, in a studio, for example, for a dining space? Are they using it to entertain or play games? And because the majority of the residents now don't come with a big stack of computers, a desk. They come with a laptop, which is portable, or a tablet. Do they need a desk? There are certain courses, 100% they'll need a desk. But also already in our competitive, well, some of our competitors have already facilitated that by having art rooms, by having designer rooms where they can actually do dressmaking or indeed technical drawing and things like that.
I mean, I would also argue that some of these large communal study spaces and gyms, a lot of the time the students have got their headphones in. So, whilst they might be in a room with other people that live in their building, they're not necessarily interacting and communicating with them. Whereas perhaps if they were in that kind of smaller space within their flat or on their floor, they might make less connections, but more meaningful ones. Because, some of these buildings are vast and quite intimidating. If we took it one step further, we talk about shared bathrooms as well as shared communal spaces. We know that if you ask a student, do you want an ensuite, they will say yes, but that's generally what there is in PBSA. But there aren't loads of ensuites in HMOs, but students are still choosing those. So I don't know, we always question when we see the data on this, how important is an ensuite really, and would students, we can't avoid the elephant in the room about affordability. Would students pick a shared bathroom if it meant that they were paying less rent because they're doing it in HMOs anyway?
I think so.
Sorry, it's interesting this question because I was called Martina and I was remembering my experiences when I went to the Birmingham College of Food and lived in the halls of residence. I had a Jack and Jill bathroom with the guy in the next room. And lived there quite happily for a year, and thankfully there was no shops. But it works because it was affordable. But also the other point is, one of my old ex-colleagues used to say, you come from a home, you have a shared bathroom there. It's interesting. I think to have the affordability, to have the range of prices, you need to look at these options, whether you do the 26 flats that I talked about at university I used to work for, where they had shower blocks. It's not the ideal, but the whole Jack and Jill, which some new housing developments around the area where I live, sadly in the north, they're actually selling Jack and Jill bathrooms as part of the design.
Lowri, where do you sit on that? I'm kind of thinking, it's having an affordable concept could help with well-being because there's a lot of anxiety and cost, but is it one of those other things that's likely to cause more conflict and a bit inflammatory?
Potentially, yes, especially when you've got individuals that don't know each other moving in. I think it just heightens some kind of triggers and barriers that might come up, such as cleanliness and privacy. And, if you've got two individuals that are going to uni at the same time, like how do you navigate through that? It's just additional stresses that could have an impact on an individual's well-being and also their enjoyment. Some people are quite confident and they will just put that boundary in place straight away. But many wouldn't feel comfortable having that conversation with someone they know, let alone a stranger. So I do think that it could potentially be a trigger that could spiral into, having a massive effect on that individual's mental health. But I do think in some cases it could be when you've got individuals that move in together, you might have people that already know each other. We've often had siblings as well, that move in together. And if that then helps with that financial stress, then of course that's going to be a benefit. But I think it goes back to, I don't know about having it as a given throughout a property, and that's the only option. But I think if it is an option on top of ensuite rooms, then yeah, I guess it could work. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. Takes me back to HMO properties.
Well, I think this question that that have been asking, it's just struck me really that I think what we're talking about is a second and third year product, when people are choosing to live together with a group of friends potentially because they're doing it anyway in HMOs. You know, they're studying together, they're living together, they're sharing a bathroom together, you know, and maybe that is the segmentation that the sector needs, is rather than creating buildings that's for everybody, that kind of, you know, maybe for first years coming into university, having bigger flats is the best option because, you know, if you don't like two of your friends, you've got 3 or 4 others that you could potentially get on with. But once you've made your friendship group, and maybe your friendship group is naturally 4 people, that whole sharing of spaces just becomes a bit easier, really. And I guess that's a question, really. You know, you know, Lowri, you just said that shouldn't be the only option, and we've said it might, you know, not one size fits all. But is that the problem in the sector, really, that we are trying to please everybody? And I think you know, the vast majority of students are probably, you know, satisfied in the buildings that we're providing for them. But if we segmented further and made something more bespoke for the stage that they are in their life, would they be even happier, even more satisfied, have better well-being, etc.? There was a question there, I don't remember what it is. Something about segmenting, you know, the product, really, rather than maybe having one product type in a big, vast building. I mean, Benjamin, how would that be efficient? I mean, how would you tackle that if you had lots of different flat sizes, lots of different configurations in the same building, maybe with different specs?
We have that in resi, you know, quite often, sort of blocks that have been built to sell that become built to rent. Quite often there's different layouts, different specifications. I think one block we furnished had something stupid like 16 different apartment types, you know, and each one of those needed to have a slightly different interior design focus and different products and stuff like that. I just think that the rents have increased so dramatically that, you know, sharing amenities, sharing bathrooms and sharing space, if that does reduce the cost, then I think that that would be an active choice, especially from a student population that are already going into quite a lot of debt if they're not financed by their parents anyway. And I think that it's just becoming more and more and more difficult to, you know, pursue a career in higher education because of the accommodation costs. And if sharing a bathroom, you know, did save money, I've seen there's a comment from Sue here that, you know, shared bathrooms don't actually reduce cost. But I mean, I'm not sure about build costs and stuff like that, but I know from a design perspective, if there was shared bathroom facilities, then that sort of encourages you to communicate with people, because you're going to see people coming and going from the bathroom, you're going to see people coming and going from the laundry, you're going to see people coming and going from the kitchen. And if those facilities are shared, and that means that the cost of your living accommodation, i.e. where you sleep, is reduced, then I think that would be a very popular option. And I also think there's lots of fun stuff that you could do from a design perspective and a product perspective, where those spaces that are shared are super flexible. So I'm a big advocate of sharing and the co-living and community living in its purest form, which is sharing everything that's within that residential space. That goes for a HMO with 5 bedrooms or a block of PBSA with 500. I'm a big advocate of it, because that's how I survived when I was a student. So, like, I mean, I know it's a long time ago, but it definitely forced me to communicate with people. And I wasn't really there at the beginning to make friends. You know, I had my own friends back home. I was there to study. I wasn't, you know, but then the shared facilities forced me to, you know, share. You know, there's a big, last time at the class conference, you know, I think you were on the panel actually, Sarah, they spoke about intentional communities and the operators sort of creating challenges within the development that forced people to solve problems that had actually been created by the operator and when people have solved the problem together, that strengthens their understanding of one another and their trust with one another, which then helps to build the community. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
I do wonder, sorry, I was just going to say, I know sort of Tony and Lowri, from your point of view, are we scared as an industry of shaking things up a little bit? Is it too safe and too secure? in student accommodation, that we've kind of taken, you know, I guess the challenges and the conflicts that might occur, particularly in an HMO, you know, who's going to mow the grass, and, you know, who did that in the toilet. You know, we've taken that out in PBSA. But is that a positive? Does that make PBSA a USP versus an HMO? I don't know. With, you know, is it too sort of sanitary now? Really, too clean?
I was just going to add to that, is that this was what came out of the co-living conference last week in a resident panel, that actually the residents liked there to be conflict, not in a bad way, but actually that conflict gave them ownership of their home and their residence, because it gave them something to solve. And to Sarah's point, are we trying so hard to take the conflict out that we're not giving them that sense of ownership?
I think the PBSA has progressively just become more designed for international students who are worried about security and safety and want as much privacy as they can possibly get, actually. And that's the difference that I've seen, certainly from when I first started the business 20 years ago to now. The accommodation, you know, has to tailor for the international student, because the international student, you know, has got the funds to be able to pay more money than a lot of the traditional English students. And the traditional English students are now sort of not able to A, afford PBSA, or B, even get into PBSA. And there's got to be a bit of a change of an affordable product to encourage, you know, English students. That's what I'm seeing.
It's interesting. I fully agree with that sentiment. I think the design of accommodation is kind of stuck in a loop, and it's actually been enhanced for different reasons. And I think we do look at individual markets. Like yourself, I'm lucky enough to work on projects in Europe as well as in the UK, and you can see the different requirements within their certain territories that you're in. I think in the UK, we benefit from having such a variety of accommodation, from Generation 1 PBSA, as they call it, from even back to some of the older university stuff. So there is a variety there. I think the points that you raised about international students is true, but it's also true of UK students. UK parents want security. They want to make sure their son and daughter are safe. And so we actually put that into the design. But going back to Sarah and Demi's point earlier on, is I think what we do need to have is a variety of products, a variety of prices, and good quality products. And I think some of the old stock, whether it be Generation 1 or pre that, needs to be looked at and brought in. But I also think we need to look at actually, and I've said this several times on this chat, and it's something I'm quite passionate about at the moment, is look at actually the design of the space that we actually start selling. Because I think there is a danger that we're just regurgitating the same model, but just putting different colours or different add-ons or enhancements to it. It's particularly I think in the communal spaces, that's running its course, and everybody's doing whatever they think is best from. And there's some great stuff out there. But I think in the bedrooms, if you look at everybody's bedroom, we kind of all have a similar footprint. And I think that's something that I think as a sector, whether we stay as PBSA or become PBSL, I think it was called last week, forgive me if I got the wrong way around, needs to be looked at. We can only benefit not just us as operators, but our funders, but also, more importantly, our end users, the residents.
But Tony, do you think is there one of the reasons why the bedrooms have not evolved? Is there another concern about safety? Because, for example, we were talking about some designs with high beds, like beds above toilet pods, or beds higher with storage underneath. And in the past, whenever I would propose something like this, I would find a lot of skepticism and worry, mainly, which then I understood as well. But yes, about safety. What if somebody trips? What if somebody has a sprained ankle and they cannot access the bed? So, but in co-living, for example, this seems to happen more often. So is there like another concern about safety maybe on this?
I think we all have an obligation to make sure that we provide safe, quality accommodation to all our users, whatever sector we're in. I think sometimes there's an over concern that this particular group has still got the old stereotype where they actually go to university for 3 reasons, and the 4th one is study. And it's important actually to working through that, because if they go out in the big bad world and they live in a duplex apartment somewhere, and we have duplexes within our portfolio, we don't have people very often, in fact very rarely, falling down the incredible stairwell that is there. We've also got the same in some of our sites abroad. So I think a lot of it is internal fears and risk management that's having an impact on moving the designs forward.
Sue Churchill, who's an architect, she's posed a question that, you know, actually with new fire regulations, with focus on sustainability, actually maybe it's a good opportunity to almost, you know, I guess tear up the rule book, because there's going to be so many changes and so many policy changes. You know, maybe some of the things that you're talking about now won't seem as important when you're actually looking at, you know, changes in fire regulation and sustainability. And, you know, I think the room layouts are going to have to change potentially. We've been so focused on insulating our buildings. Now they're overheating and the climate is getting hotter. Are we actually going to have to look at cooling our buildings, which will inevitably impact the layout, the design, you know, and then the space to be able to put this kind of technology in place? So I don't know how I'm conscious that we're kind of wrapping up the session here, but we've all agreed that we haven't seen very much change in bedrooms and in flats. You know, what is going to take a change, you know, and you know, how can the industry and all of our viewers watching help kind of push this forward, because otherwise it won't change and the students will still not get what they want.
I think the students are starting to become quite vociferous about the lack of accommodation, the cost of it, and, you know, like the stories of guys applying to go to Manchester University and then ending up living in Crewe. You know, you know, there's only so much longer that these guys are going to be able to put up with this sort of treatment, really, because, you know, it's a big investment, that the debt that they go into, or the investment that their parents put into these kids to go to university. You know, you really do want the entire experience, and I think there's got to be a way to build more cost-effective student accommodation. If that means reducing amenities and reducing the sizes of the rooms, and that makes the build cost more cost-effective and the speed of the build quicker. You know, we've all seen how much of a lack of accommodation there has been this year, especially in the big student cities. That might drive this forwards. Hopefully, you know, something has to change, doesn't it? Because there just isn't enough PBSA beds.
Yeah,
I guess
go on, Lowri.
I was just going to say, it does, you know, going back to, you know, it's understanding the market as well and the demographic within those cities. Maybe not everyone needs to change. Maybe it suits to what those students within those cities are asking for. So I think it's really important that we just understand that student voice as well. Like, what changes do we need to make? Is there a need for a change, and to what scale? I think it's really, really important to really get an understanding of that as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that's quite difficult, I guess, to quantify in this conversation is most student beds are full. So on paper, it would be, well, why do we need to change anything? But, you know, we know that UCAS have, you know, identified that there's going to be a boom in 18-year-olds in 2030. What we do know from that data is they're not all going to choose to be university students. There will be people that will be doing other types of courses and other kinds of learning. They're not all going to need student accommodation or be eligible for student accommodation, come to that. So if we can't build a product that meets their needs from an affordability point of view, for example, that makes their decision quite easy, that actually we're not going to go to university because we can't afford to, because there isn't a product that meets our, you know, our price point. But we also know that out of that demographic, it's not going to be as many Chinese students, it's going to be more domestic students, it's going to be more Indian students. And Deenie and I have just done a piece of research on international students, and contrary to popular belief, they're not choosing studios, they're ending up in studios because that's what's left when they come to book. So I think there's probably quite a big difference between what people are doing and what they're putting up with versus what they actually want. And, you know, to your point, Lowri, maybe that's, you know, that's fine, because the vast majority are, you know, have got a roof over their head and they're happy, you know, in that environment. And for some metrics and some cities, it actually does work. But I guess that's looking at the data and working out what's right for each individual market and the types of student that's going to be coming in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
I've been chomping at the bit to get in here, but I think the almost attitude, if it's not, let's not fix it, doesn't work anymore. I think there is a need to have diverse products now to meet the different needs, not only of the current needs and as in the number of bed space for the different value, affordability levels, but also the needs of the people that come on. As Sarah says, as the demographic increases, not all of them are going to be student, but they may be studying an apprenticeship in another city. They may have different needs for their living space than a pure student. But I also think it'll only change by A, having these conversations, and B, somebody being a first mover actually to step out there and actually produce something. And also with the influx of the co-living market, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, in Europe it's well established, in the UK it's not quite there. That actually have an impact on our design as we grow as more into one industry rather than separate sectors.
Build to rent, you know, is massively populated by students as well. You know, people don't think that students, you know, think students only live in certain types of accommodation, but they absolutely do not. And, you know, particularly in Manchester and in London, build to rent is heavily populated by students who either can't get into PBSA or don't want to live in PBSA, and they want that resi experience. So it definitely is happening. And it would be the same for co-living. You know, why students would live in co-living. It's not only a certain age bracket that can live in a certain place.
100%.
I think, I mean, Martina, we'll let you have the final word. You've spent, you know, an awful lot of time creating this white paper and looking at different options. You know, this conversation, I guess, is the first step in getting your white paper out. What do you want to happen next? You know, what do you want the legacy of your white paper to be?
I mean, in my view, this is just a starting point. As I said at the beginning, it's not final solutions. It would be interesting to investigate with developers, operators, architects as well, like collaborate together and see whether there could be a new benchmark that we can explore. So yes, collaboration with the sector to look at this and see if it's worth doing something different and how.
Definitely. Well, we certainly hope that will happen, and we've had a very engaged audience watching who I'm sure are, you know, just as inspired by your paper as we are today. I'm just going to pass over to Deenie to close today's session.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. That was fascinating. I know that we could probably speak for another hour, and I know we started a conversation before we even came on live, and there's loads to chat about. And I think Martina and all your team at Design at Heart, thank you for doing this work, because I think it's a really important piece of work. I'm hoping it's going to be an important milestone in kind of how we evolve forward, and I think it's a great piece of work, and I think it's great that we've been able to have this open discussion and just discuss how we can move this forward. I think it's safe to say that we've all agreed that there is room. It's time to evolve this. It's time to move things forward. I think, you know, Sarah and I have been talking for ages about product diversity, that we don't have enough product diversity. So, and, you know, as to Sue's point in the chat, is that there's lots of regulation changes. So actually maybe this is the point that we can all come together and work on that. And I think, Tony, your point about who's going to be the first mover is someone's got to be brave. And we hope someone could do that. And if you are feeling brave, do give Martina and her team a shout, because they've done a lot of the thinking for you. So do get in touch with her, and please, someone be brave, because I think there is a new market, and I think you will win if you do go brave. So thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panel for the great discussion and bringing all your knowledge and experience of the sector to the session. Thank you to those that joined us and for all your engagement. It was a really engaged session. As I say, the white paper should be in your inbox if you've registered. If you do want to reach out to Martina to discuss any of that, or if you haven't received it, then please do, and just keep space and follow a Design at Heart's web pages for updates and developments as we progress this conversation. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye.